The steak arrived still sizzling, its sharp, honest smell cutting through the polished calm of the restaurant, and for a moment Maribel Knox forgot how to breathe. It wasn't the food that stopped her. It was the folded note sliding onto the white plate beneath it, placed there by a waiter whose hands trembled just enough to betray a life carrying far more weight than trays and orders. In that instant, the lonely billionaire who had mastered boardrooms and balance sheets felt exposed in a way no hostile takeover had ever achieved, as if the quiet daylight outside the windows had suddenly turned into a spotlight aimed straight at her heart. Before the story pulls you deeper, take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Kindness Journal if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet moments that change lives when no one is watching. Maribel had chosen the restaurant precisely because it was ordinary. Sunlight streamed in through tall windows, catching dust motes and softening the edges of everything it touched. The lunch crowd was steady but not loud, made up of office workers and retirees, people with places to be and stories that didn't involve private jets or security teams. She wore a simple blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back without ceremony, her wedding ring long gone and replaced by nothing at all. No one here knew she owned companies that shaped cities or that her face appeared in financial magazines. Today she wanted to be invisible, a woman eating a midday meal alone, testing whether anonymity could ease the ache that followed her everywhere. Loneliness had crept into Maribel's life slowly, disguised as success. Years of relentless work had built an empire but hollowed out her days. Friends drifted away when she cancelled too many dinners, and love never stood a chance against her obsession with control. The undercover lunches were her small rebellion, a way to sit among strangers and pretend, for an hour, that she belonged somewhere simple. Ordering steak at noon felt indulgent, almost defiant, like she was reclaiming something solid and real. Rowan Hale noticed her the moment she walked in. He noticed everyone, not out of curiosity but necessity. Waiting tables during the day allowed him to pick up his son from school before evening, a fragile arrangement that kept their small life stitched together. Rowan carried exhaustion like a second skin. His mornings began before sunrise, packing lunches and braiding a child's hair with clumsy care, and ended with homework at a kitchen table scarred by time. Still, he smiled easily, because smiling kept tips steady and questions away. As Rowan approached Maribel's table, he sensed the careful way she held herself, the practiced calm that suggested she was used to being seen yet desperately hoping not to be recognized. He placed the steak down gently, as if noise itself might break her. Beneath the plate, he slipped the note, a risk he debated for days in his mind and finally chose in a heartbeat. It wasn't flirtation or pity that drove him. It was recognition. Maribel unfolded the paper with hands that suddenly felt too large. The words were written in neat, restrained lines, ink pressed firmly as if to anchor something fleeting. The note spoke of how some people come into places carrying quiet storms, how loneliness can be loud even in a full room, and how being seen, truly seen, can feel terrifying. It ended not with a request, but with gratitude, thanking her for reminding a stranger that strength and sadness often walk together. The note stopped her cold because it named her pain without knowing her name. Her chest tightened, and the restaurant seemed to fade around the edges. For years, Maribel had been surrounded by people who wanted something from her. This note wanted nothing. It simply offered understanding. She looked up, catching Rowan's eyes for a brief second before he moved away, already swallowed by the rhythm of service. That fleeting connection cracked something open inside her, something she had sealed shut to survive. The afternoon stretched on, and Maribel found herself lingering long after the plate was cleared. She watched Rowan move from table to table, efficient yet gentle, pausing to kneel beside a dropped fork or steady a wobbly chair. There was a dignity in his work that reminded her of her father, a man who had taught her that honest labor mattered, long before wealth complicated everything. She wondered about the life that had shaped Rowan's careful kindness, about the burdens he carried so quietly. Rowan, meanwhile, worried he had overstepped. Slipping the note felt reckless now that the lunch rush slowed and doubt crept in. He had written it during a break, thinking of his own loneliness after his wife's sudden passing, of how invisible grief could make a person feel. He had seen that same invisible weight in Maribel and acted on instinct. If she complained, he could lose this job, and with it the fragile balance he fought to maintain for his son, Eamon. When Maribel finally stood to leave, she left more than a generous tip. She left the note folded carefully beside her plate, with a second piece of paper beneath it. Rowan found it while clearing the table, his heart pounding. The new note thanked him for his courage and asked him, simply, to keep being who he was. There was no name, no number, just sincerity. For reasons he couldn't explain, it felt like a lifeline. Days passed, then weeks, and Maribel returned again and again. Always during the day, always alone. She ordered different meals but sat at the same table, as if anchoring herself to a place where something real had happened. Rowan never mentioned the notes, and neither did she, but an unspoken understanding settled between them. Their exchanges were limited to professional gestures and shared glances, yet something shifted. Maribel began to notice the sunlight more, the way ordinary people laughed without checking their phones, the relief of being known without being exposed. Outside the restaurant, her world remained relentless. Board meetings grew more hostile, pressure mounted, and headlines speculated about her personal life with careless ease. The loneliness returned each evening, heavier than before, but now it had a counterweight. The memory of that note reminded her that her pain was human, not a personal failure. Rowan's life, too, felt subtly altered. Writing that note had reminded him of his own worth beyond survival. He started leaving small affirmations on napkins for himself during breaks, grounding reminders that kindness didn't have to be loud to matter. At home, he hugged Eamon longer, listened more closely, and allowed himself moments of softness he once believed he couldn't afford. The true turning point came on a bright midday when Maribel arrived looking different. Not wealthier or more powerful, but lighter, as if she had set something down. She stayed until the restaurant emptied, and when Rowan brought her check, she slid another note toward him, heavier this time. Inside was an offer for a scholarship fund she had quietly established, one that would support single parents pursuing education while working. It wasn't charity framed as rescue, it was partnership rooted in respect. She wrote that his note reminded her why she had started building things in the first place, not for legacy, but for impact. Rowan sat with that paper long after she left, sunlight warming the table where her plate had been. Tears came without warning, not from relief alone, but from being valued without conditions. He didn't know who she truly was, and it didn't matter. What mattered was that kindness had moved in a circle, returning to him multiplied. Maribel never revealed her identity to him, and she didn't need to. The restaurant remained her refuge, a place where she could exist without titles. Over time, the loneliness loosened its grip. She invested differently, lived differently, allowing space for connection rather than control. The note from a single dad waiter had stopped her cold and set her moving in a new direction, one guided not by fear of loss but by openness to grace. As this story draws near its end, if it has touched your heart or reminded you of the power of small, brave acts, please take a moment to like, share, and engage with this video. Your support helps stories of kindness reach the people who need them most. And just before we part, we have a special request for you to comment below about a moment when a simple act of kindness changed your life or someone else's. In a world obsessed with grand gestures and public victories, it was a folded note under a plate of steak, exchanged in the soft light of day, that changed everything. Sometimes, the most powerful transformations begin not with recognition, but with understanding, quietly offered and deeply received.